Bento grid layouts are one of the current web design trends. And no, I'm not talking about literal bento boxes. I'm talking about gorgeous web design grids that are modeled after bentos. And you've probably already seen it on websites like this one, or even this one. Beautiful. Now, these very expensive websites use a technique called Css Grid to achieve these beautiful bento layouts. And unless you are a developer, these used to be pretty complicated to achieve. But with the new version of the Spectra visual website builder for WordPress, this is now super easy to do. We will use an example found on the website of a popular design app, and we will replicate it without a single line of code. And I might even use this technique to create my very own family tree bento grid.
We started small, just a dream. You see, a website for our family tree. With Spectra's visual builder, we'd be free to create a masterpiece for all to see.
Hello, I'm Kay from the Spectra team, and as promised, I will show you how to create bento grid designs for your WordPress website. We will recreate a bento grid found on the Procreate app website. And once recreated, it will be super easy to reuse that same grid for new projects, like for example, a family tree website. Yeah, I know, we really look familiar. Now on top of that, I will show you a super easy way to replicate pretty much any bento grid design layout. But first, CSS Grid versus Flexbox. So according to Google, the basic difference between CSS Grid layout and CSS Flexbox layout is that Flexbox was designed for layout in one dimension, either a row or a column, whereas Grid was designed for two-dimensional layouts, rows and columns at the same time. So in other words, Grid and Flexbox are two different methods to create a layout for your website. And the good news is that with Spectra, you can now do both. Today we'll talk about CSS Grid, but if you're interested in Flexbox, we have a dedicated video on the subject. So if you want to watch it, you'll find a link in the description below, but of course, only watch it once you're done watching this one. Now, let's get into it. And let's start with the foundations. So I'm going to show you my very own technique to replicate pretty much any bento grid layout design. And this is actually the technique we'll be using in this tutorial. And the first step, which kind of makes sense, is to just take a look at what you want to replicate. So you can quickly analyze it. Now, once you've done this, you want to create a grid. Now I'm doing it here on the computer, but you can use pen and paper. It doesn't really matter. So now, for example, if I look at this block here on the right-hand side, it's not as wide as the one here on the left-hand side. And if I go back on my grid, I could say that the top right block would be 2 cells wide, whereas the top left block would be 3 cells wide. And let me show you quickly, that would make sense. Now I could use a grid with 7 blocks, it doesn't really matter as long as you can replicate what you see here. And this is what I've done. So let me alternate. You see container 1 here, container 1, then container 2, 3, 4, and you can see I really replicated that layout, and container 5. Now the next step is to annotate the grid to define the structure. And once again, you can do that with just pen and paper. Don't sweat it. And this is what I've done. You can see we have 5 columns. So start at C1 up until C5. So 5 columns. Then we have 4 rows, R1 to R4. So up to here, pretty classic, but pay attention to the next step, because in the next step, we're going to add positions, vertical and horizontal positions. Super easy. Starts at position 1, then position 2, and so on. But the difference is that with the structure, for example, we stopped at column 5, whereas for the positioning, we have to add one more position. And this is the key that's going to enable us to tell the browser exactly where we want containers and how we want them in a two-dimensional layout. And if you don't understand it yet, don't worry, because it's really going to make sense in just a few moments. But for the time being, just remember there are horizontal positions and vertical positions. So here, horizontal, we go from position 1 to position 6, and vertical, position 1 to position 5. Next, recreating the Procreate website bento grid. So in WordPress, let's go to Pages, Add New Page. Let me close this. Now let's call it My Grid 1. And next, click on the plus sign, click on Container, and let's select this structure. Now with our container selected, you want to go to General, Container Type, And where you see content box width, you want to change the value from 1200 pixels to 980 pixels. Next, let's close this subtab and let's open the layout subtab. So here by default we are on Flex, but let's click on the Grid tab. And now we need to define the number of columns and rows we need for our design. Now, as a reminder, this is what we want to replicate, and this is what we came up with. So we have 5 columns and 4 rows. So let's replicate that in WordPress. So here where you see columns, click on the plus sign, and we're going to do it up until we have 5 columns. And the same thing for the rows, 2, 3, and 4. So because we did all the homework in advance, it's now super easy. Next, click on the Style tab, open the Spacing subtab, and where you see padding, we're going to unlink the values and change it to 120, 60, 200, and 60. Now click on the responsive icon and let's select tablet. And here it's going to be 80, 40, 120, and 40. Now let's repeat the operation. Click on the responsive icon and select mobile. And this time it's going to be 40, 20, 60, and 20 pixels. Awesome. Let's go back in desktop mode and let's save our work. Now let me click on the plus sign and I'm just going to drag a container right where you see the plus sign here. So just drop it there and make sure it's selected. And if you're not sure, you can always open the document overview and you see the document view here. So with our subcontainer selected, you want to go to the General tab, Layout, and where you see Align Items, let's select Flex Start, and the same thing for Justify Content, Flex Start. Next, click on the Style tab, open the Background subtab, and where you see Type, select Color, and pick any color you want. In my case, I'm going to pick this color. So let me close this, and let's open the Border subtab, and where you see Radius, let's give it a radius of 10 pixels all around. Alright, let's close this and let's open the Spacing subtab. Let's change the row gap to 0. And where you see padding, let's change the values to 30 pixels all around in desktop. Then let's click on the responsive icon, switch to tablet. And once again, let's make it 30 pixels all around. Then let's click on the responsive icon, switch to mobile. And this time is going to be 20 pixels all around. Great, let's get back into desktop mode. And next click on the plus sign and let's drag a heading widget right in the middle. Now let's change the text to pre-title. Then click on the Style tab. Let's select black for color. Then click on the typography icon and let's make the size 12 pixels. Transform should be set to uppercase. Now let's scroll down and letter spacing should be set to 1 pixel. Great, let's close this. Let me open the document overview. Let me expand and let's duplicate this title. So I'm just going to click on the 3 dots and hit duplicate. Next, let me change the text to container 1. Then click on the typography icon and this time let's make it 30 pixels and transform should be set to default. Now let me close this and in the document overview you want to select the subcontainer, click on the 3 dots and hit rename and let's call it container 1 and click on save. Now let's collapse this. Let's click on the 3 dots and hit duplicate and we're going to do this until we have 5 containers. Now let's rename each of these with the same technique. So container 2, click on the 3 dots, rename, change it to container 2 and save. And let's repeat the operation for each. All right, now let's change the text for each of the containers. So just click here, container 2, 3, 4, and 5. And let's click on update to save our work. And the next step is where the magic happens. And once again, because we've done our homework before, this is going to be super easy. So basically, we're going to use the positions on the grid to help us. So first, let me collapse all of the subcontainers. Let me select container 1, go to General, and then let's close the Container tab subtab, and let's open the Grid Item Settings subtab. And here you can see we have two more subtabs, Simple and Advanced. Let me quickly show you Simple. So for example, here I could say the column width is 9 or 2, 3, 4, and so on. Super easy. Same thing for the row height. Here I have 2, 3, 4, and so on. So let me reset this and let's go to the Advanced tab. And don't be scared because it's going to be super easy. So let's click on Advanced. And now it's asking us column start and column end and row start and row end. So going back to our grid, this time we're not going to use the columns and rows. In other words, we're not going to use the structure, but we're going to use the positions that we've already prepared. So we see that in the case of container 1, the horizontal positions go from P1 to P4 when it comes to the container. If you want the whole container 1, it goes from P1 to P4. And remember, we don't count in columns. Columns, it would be column 1, 2, and 3. But here, we need to think in terms of positions. For the columns, it's horizontal positions. So P1 to P4. So let's do this. Column start at 1 and column ends at 4. So far, so good. Now let's apply the same technique for the vertical positions. And if you want the full height, it would go from P1 to P3. So 1 to 3. So row start 1 and row end 3. Great. Let's repeat the process for the other containers. So let me select container 2 and temporarily let me close the document overview. And with container 2 selected, I'm still in General Grid Item Settings. Let's look at our positioning map. So horizontally, it goes from 4 to 6 and vertically from 1 to 3. So let me click on Advanced, let me scroll. And as we saw, it goes from 4 to 6 and from 1 to 3. Great, let's select container 3. So I'm just going to click here. Once again, if you want to be sure, open the document overview. And since we renamed all the containers, it's super easy to not make a mistake. And that's one of the reasons why I always like to rename my elements, especially containers and subcontainers. All right, we have container 3 selected. Let's close this. And we can see here horizontally, it goes from 1 to 3 and vertically from 3 to 4. So once again, General Grid Item Settings, Advanced, 1 to 3 and 3 to 4. Awesome. Let me select container 4, General Grid Item Settings. Let's click on Advanced. And our positioning map says that horizontally, it goes from 1 to 3 and vertically from 4 to 5. So let's reflect that, 1 to 3 and 4 to 5. Now let me scroll so you can see the full picture. So we can see it's right here below container 3 where it should be. So let's select container 5 and taking a look at our positioning map, we can see that horizontally, it goes from 3 to 6 and vertically from 3 to 5. So let's reflect that. General Grid Item Settings, Advanced, you know the drill now. Column starts at 3, ends at 6. Row starts at 3 and row end 5. Now let's click on Update to save our work. And you can see it really matches what we were trying to achieve. So this is the original design. This is the grid that we recreated. Now let me remove the guides. And here is the version with rounded corners, without the guides, and with spacing. Now we're getting closer, but we need to take care of vertical spacing. So let me open the document overview. Let's make sure we select container 1. Then here in General, you want to click on Container Type. And where you see minimum height, click on VH. And the value is going to be 36 VH. Now click on the responsive icon, go into tablet mode. Once again, minimum height, click on VH. And it's going to be 33. Let's repeat the operation for the mobile. VH, and it's going to be 40. Now let's go back into desktop mode and let's select container 2. And once again, VH 40, Now tablet mode, VH33, and you know the drill. Let's go into mobile mode, VH, and this time is going to be 40. All right, let's go back into desktop mode, click on container 3, but this time it's going to be slightly different. So click on VH and give it a value of 18. Now let's go into tablet mode, VH33, and mobile mode, VH40. Great. Let's go back in desktop mode and let's select container 3. And once again, VH18. Now let's go into tablet mode, VH33, and mobile mode, VH40. Now let's go back into desktop mode. Let's select container 5, then still in general, container type, minimum height, click on VH, give it a value of 36. Then in tablet mode, VH33, and finally mobile, VH40. Awesome. Now let's go back into desktop mode, and this is closer to what we want to achieve. So let's preview this page, and there you go. Pretty close if you want my opinion. Now all I need to do is change the content. And if you want to learn about the basics of the Spectra visual website builder for WordPress, you'll find a dedicated video on the channel. I'll put the link in the description below. And of course, as usual, only watch it once you're done watching this one. So here, for example, let me scroll, let me select container 1, go to style, and where you see type, I'm going to click on image, then click on the plus sign, and I'm just going to select file on my computer. Click on select, and this is the original. So let me change the text. Let me click on update. Now let me refresh. And as you can see, it's pretty close to the original. And now all I need to do is replicate the process for the other containers. Now I wanted the dark background, and since we're using the Astra theme, I went to Astra, customize. Then I went to global, colors, and I made sure content background is set to black. And now let's go back on the Procreate website, and here is the Bento grid. And as you can see, it's pretty close. Now I personally decided I didn't want it to be as tall as it is here in the original version, but if you want to do it, it's super simple. Just go back to the steps we did before, and instead of a virtual height of 36, so instead of 36 VH, you could put 45 VH, 50 VH. It's up to you. You need to play around with the numbers, but you get the idea. So let's recap. We went on the Procreate website and we found this grid. Next, we did our homework. We recreated a simple grid and we noted the number of columns and rows needed, as well as the horizontal and vertical positions. And this allowed us to replicate this design. First, just the shapes, just to be sure we have the right structure and everything works out. Then we played with vertical spacing and we changed the content to achieve this, which is pretty close to this if you want my opinion. So with this grid that we created, we can reuse it. And actually that's what I did, because I decided to recreate my family tree Bento design style. I used the same grid. I basically copied the grid we just created and created this one. Now, as you can see, I can scroll down. I got even more cells. Now, how did I achieve this? Well, it's super simple. All I did was I duplicated the main container. So now I have 2 containers and I just changed the spacing between both main containers, and voila. Now, which of my AI family member do you prefer? Is it my dad, my mom, my nephew, my grandma number 1? You get the idea. Just pick your choice, and I dare you to create your own family tree Bento style. And the beauty of it is that if you recall in the settings, we took care of the responsive modes. So now it also looks beautiful here on the tablet. It's a different layout, of course, because we just showed the full container, which makes sense on a tablet. And the same is true for the mobile. It looks just gorgeous. Those big images, simple cells, but just to show you that you can achieve a super complex layout on the desktop, and then it's super easy to change it to a type of layout that works better with tablets and mobile. Now, after this video, creating gorgeous Bento grid designs should be super easy for you. So make sure you let your creativity flow, and I'd be curious to know what you think about this design trend. Please let us know in the comments below. And if you want to test it for yourself, just try the Spectra Visual Website Builder. So you can go to zipwp.com and try it for yourself. Or if you are in a hurry, just go to try.new. And literally it's going to create a WordPress install on the fly and you can test it right away. But bear in mind that website will only be there for a limited time just for you to test. And of course, I'll put the link in the description below. Whew, it's getting hot in here. And I can't put the aircon because otherwise you're gonna hear the aircon during the whole tutorial. I have to sweat and suffer, but it's worth it. It's worth it.
This is Bento Grid, a brand new feature.